My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye at her husband's company launch party, the most important night of his career, and said, loud enough for 3 people nearby to hear, "I'm sorry, but this event is invitation only. Did someone let you in by mistake?" My son Colin stood 2 feet away and said nothing. I was holding the invitation he had mailed me himself in an envelope with his company logo on the corner. I had carried it from Beaumont to Houston in my purse, like something precious. I had worn the same navy jacket I bought the year his father passed, the one I always pressed carefully before anything that mattered. And his wife, Renata Aldridge, excuse me, Renata Marsh now. She insisted on hyphenating for the business cards, but dropped it socially whenever it suited her, looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I folded my hands over the invitation, smiled at the woman standing next to Renata who had witnessed the whole thing, and I said quietly, "Forgive me, I must have the wrong room." Then I walked toward the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and called the only person in the world who knew exactly what needed to happen next. Before I tell you the rest, I want to ask you something. Have you ever arrived somewhere believing you were wanted, only to discover you were merely tolerated? Leave your answers in the comments below, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Loretta, and I have lived in Beaumont, Texas for 41 years. I raised my son Colin in a 2-bedroom house on Oleander Street with a porch that needed repainting every 3 years, and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and the cedar candles my late husband Thomas used to buy from the church bazaar. We didn't have much. We had enough. Thomas drove a delivery truck until his knees gave out. Then he worked the front desk at a local insurance office, until the cancer took him at 62. I cleaned other people's homes for 22 years. Not because I had no other choice, but because I was good at it. I set my own hours, and it let me be home when Colin came off the school bus each afternoon. Colin was a quiet boy, serious. He read everything he could get his hands on. Library books, cereal boxes, the back of shampoo bottles, if that was all that was available. Thomas used to say he was going to either run the world or disappear into a university, and we'd never see him again. Turns out it was something in between. He earned a full scholarship to UT Austin, business and finance. He graduated 3rd in his class and moved to Houston immediately, the way ambitious young men from small Texas towns tend to do, quickly and without looking back for very long. I was proud. I am still proud. I want to be clear about that. None of what I am about to tell you changes the fact that I love my son, or that I believed in him when no one else did, or that I spent years making sacrifices so small and so quiet that most of them never made it into conversation. But I also need to tell the truth about what happened at the Aldridge Tower ballroom on a Thursday evening in March. Colin called me 6 weeks before the event. It was a Saturday morning, and I was weeding the garden in the backyard, the small patch of soil where Thomas and I used to grow tomatoes. I keep it up mostly out of habit now. Some habits are harder to drop than others. My phone rang. Colin's name appeared on the screen. I answered before the second ring. "Hey, Mom." I could hear background noise. Traffic, maybe. The specific urban hum that tells you someone is moving fast through a city that never slows down. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything all right?" Yeah. Listen." He paused the way he did when he was about to say something that required a runway. "I wanted to personally invite you to the launch event next month. Marsh Capital is going public with our first commercial real estate fund. It's a big deal. Investors, press, the whole thing." My chest tightened with something warm and sharp at the same time. "Oh, Colin, I'd love to be there." "Good." He sounded genuinely pleased, I thought. His voice loosened slightly. "I'll send you the invitation by mail. Dress nice, okay? It's a formal event." I laughed softly. "I think I can manage that." A brief pause. Then he added, just before we hung up, "It's a really important night for us, Mom. For the company." Something in the way he said us made me pause. Not us meaning our family. Us meaning him and Renata, and the brand they had been building together since before they married. Still, I let it pass, because hope has a way of smoothing over rough edges before you've had time to examine them properly. After we hung up, I sat on the back porch step for a while. Thomas's old garden chair was still there beside me. I told him about it quietly, the way I'd gotten used to doing since he passed. "You'd be so proud," I said. "Our boy's going public. The invitation arrived 4 days later. It was beautiful, actually. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering, a small silver logo in the corner that read Marsh Capital. Guest of honor. Miss Loretta Marsh. I stood in my kitchen and read my own name on that card for a long time. I ironed the navy jacket that evening. Then I polished my good shoes and set them by the door. The following week, I drove to the JCPenney in Beaumont and bought a new pair of dress pants, charcoal gray, because the ones I had were starting to thin at the knees. I didn't tell anyone I bought them. I didn't tell Colin. It felt like the kind of detail that belonged to me. My granddaughter Bea called me 2 days before the event. She was 11 and lived with Colin and Renata in their midtown townhouse. She had Thomas's eyes and her mother's sharpness, a combination that occasionally startled me with its accuracy. "Grammy," she said, her voice carrying that particular brightness that meant she was somewhere she wasn't supposed to be talking on the phone. "Are you really coming Thursday?" "I really am. I bought new pants and everything." She laughed. Then, softer, "Mom said the party is for business people, I know, sweetheart. Your dad invited me." A pause. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Grammy, don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there." The words landed with a weight she probably hadn't intended. "Why would anyone do that, honey?" But before she could answer, I heard Renata's voice sharp in the background. "Bea, we talked about phone time before dinner." The line went quiet a moment later. I held the phone after the call ended and stared at the garden through the window. That was the moment doubt arrived. I recognized it immediately, because a mother never fully stops recognizing the sound of a warning she wishes she didn't hear. Still, I packed my overnight bag the next morning and drove the 90 minutes to Houston. The Aldridge Tower Ballroom occupied the 32nd floor of a building in downtown Houston that still made me tip my head back when I stood at its base. Glass and steel, so tall it seemed to lean slightly in the evening light, though I knew that was only my imagination. The lobby alone had floors that gleamed like still water, security guards in dark suits. A registration table attended by 2 young women in matching blazers who checked names against a digital list with the focused efficiency of people who had been told to move things along. I gave my name. Miss Loretta Marsh, guest of honor. One of them looked up, then back at her screen, then typed something. She smiled politely. "Elevators to your left, 32nd floor." I rode up alone in the elevator, watching the city spread out below me through the glass panel. Houston at dusks, highways lit like river systems, buildings casting long shadows east. It was beautiful in the way things are beautiful when you're nervous. Sharp, a little unreal. The doors opened to the sound of a string quartet and the low, steady murmur of a room full of people who felt comfortable at events like this. I stepped out and took it in slowly. Round tables with white linens and tall floral centerpieces. Servers moving through the room with trays. A bar along one wall. A small stage at the far end with a Marsh Capital banner above it. I spotted Colin immediately. He was near the center of the room, taller than most of the people around him, talking to a group of men in dark suits. He had Thomas's posture, straight, assured, and his own confidence, the kind that had taken him years to grow into. My chest filled with something complicated and proud. Then he saw me. The smile stayed on his face, but it changed. I don't know how to explain it more precisely than that. It changed the way a smile changes when someone appears earlier than expected at a party that isn't quite ready for them. He crossed toward me quickly. "Mom." He kissed my cheek. "You made it. I wouldn't have missed it for anything." His eyes dropped briefly. My jacket, my shoes, my purse. The dark leather one I'd had for 7 years, because it was good quality and I take care of my things. Then his attention flickered back to the group behind him. "Come say hello," he said, and he walked me toward the table. Renata appeared before we reached it. She was wearing a white sheath dress that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Her dark hair swept back, a single strand of gold at her throat. She was a beautiful woman. She was also a woman who had decided, somewhere in the years since Colin brought her home for the first Thanksgiving, that I represented something inconvenient about her husband's past. "Loretta," she said, with the particular warmth that isn't warm. "Renata. You look wonderful." She leaned in slightly and did the thing where you almost kiss someone's cheek without actually touching them. "Thank you for making the drive." She said it the way people say it when they mean I did not entirely expect you to show up. I smiled. Of course. Colin guided me toward the table with one hand briefly at my elbow. The investors were already seated, 4 men and 2 women, all wearing the quiet confidence of people who move significant money for a living. I recognized one of them from a Houston Business Journal photo I'd seen in Colin's office a few years ago. A woman named Eugenia Holbrook. She was in her 60s, white-haired, pearl earrings. She smiled at me when I sat down. "You must be Colin's mother," she said warmly. "I am. Loretta Marsh. He's told us so much about you." Something about the way she said it felt genuine. Not the scripted warmth of the room, something real. I found myself relaxing slightly for the first time since the elevator. Then Renata sat beside me and spoke quietly without looking at me. "This is a business event," she said. "Best not to bring up anything too personal tonight." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" She kept her eyes forward. Colin worked hard to build an image for this company. People have certain expectations. My hands stilled in my lap. "An image," I repeated softly. She finally glanced at me. "You know what I mean." I did. That was the terrible part. I understood exactly what she meant, because I had spent the last 3 years slowly understanding that Renata Aldridge Marsh believed my existence, my house, my history, my clean but ordinary clothes, and my Beaumont address complicated the story she and Colin were telling about themselves. The dinner began. Wine was poured. Appetizers arrived. Conversations moved across the table in the careful rhythm of people auditioning one another professionally. Colin talked well. He always talked well. He explained the fund structure, the investment thesis, the growth projections, and he did it with the kind of ease that made the people across from him lean forward slightly as he spoke. He was good at this. I had never doubted that, but every few minutes I caught him glancing at me with an expression I couldn't name then but can name now. Vigilance, like I was something that required monitoring. At one point, Eugenia Holbrook turned to me directly. "Loretta, did you always know Colin would go into finance?" I smiled. I always knew he would do something that required reading every document twice before signing it. The table laughed. Genuinely. Even Colin almost smiled, but Renata said immediately, "He gets his discipline from the business program at UT. Best decision he ever made." As if the question had been about the university, not about his mother. As if I hadn't been part of the answer. I lowered my eyes and took a sip of water. Then a server approached behind me with a tray of champagne glasses for the upcoming toast. As he reached across the table, someone nudged the back of his arm. I couldn't tell who, some movement at the edge of the crowd. And the glass tipped. Cold champagne poured directly across the front of my jacket. There was an immediate quiet at our table. The server was horrified. He began apologizing profusely, reaching for cloth napkins, and I tried to reassure him. "It's all right, really, it's all right. Accidents happen," while pressing my napkin against the fabric as calmly as I could. Then Renata exhaled slowly beside me. The sound she made was not concern. It was the sound of inconvenience. Colin looked at me across the table with an expression that made something inside me go very still. He didn't ask if I was okay. He said, quietly but clearly enough to hear, "Mom, can you maybe go to the restroom and sort that out before the toast?" Sort that out. The way he said it. The way his eyes were already moving back to the investors when he said it. As if I were a logistical issue to be managed rather than his mother sitting at his table, soaking wet through her best jacket. I stood, excused myself, walked toward the restroom with my ruined jacket and my very straight posture. Inside, I stood alone at the marble sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. 63 years old. Hands that had cleaned hotel rooms and scrubbed kitchen floors and folded laundry and pressed my son's graduation shirt with a travel iron in a Motel 6 because we couldn't afford the campus hotel. These same hands. I blotted the jacket as best I could. It didn't matter. The stain wasn't going to disappear in the next 5 minutes. What disappeared was something else. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and called a number I had not used in almost 18 months. The phone rang twice. Then a calm, clear voice answered, "Raymond Okafor." I exhaled. "Raymond," I said quietly, "I think it's time." A pause. Then softer, "What happened?" I looked at myself in the mirror and told him. Raymond Okafor had been my accountant, my business advisor, and the closest thing to a financial conscience I had for 27 years. He had known Thomas. He had attended Thomas's funeral. He was the only person outside of my attorney who knew the full, unedited picture of my finances, including everything that had been built quietly over 3 decades while I cleaned other people's homes and raised my son in a 2-bedroom house in Beaumont. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. That had always been one of Raymond's best qualities. "All right, Loretta," he said. "Give me 45 minutes." I put the phone away and walked back to the ballroom. Renata caught me near the edge of the room before I reached the table. Her expression was different now, more deliberate. "I need to be honest with you," she said, her voice low. "This event is crucial for Colin's credibility with these investors. You understand that, and your being here." She glanced toward my jacket, is creating a certain impression. I looked at her steadily. "What impression is that?" She folded her arms slightly. "Colin has worked very hard to build this firm's reputation. He comes from humble beginnings, which is admirable. But this is the moment his investors decide whether they fully trust him with serious capital." I let the silence stretch between us. "And you're concerned that I complicate that," I said. She met my eyes. "I'm concerned that appearances matter tonight in ways they don't matter in other situations." There it was. Not cruel enough to quote in public. Just honest enough to be unmistakable. I nodded once. "I understand," I said, and I turned and walked back to the table. Colin had watched the exchange from a distance. When I returned and sat down beside Eugenia Holbrook, he came around the table and crouched beside my chair, his voice low. "Mom! Look, I know tonight is a lot. Maybe after the toast you could head back to the hotel, get some st. You drove a long way today." I looked at him. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away. And in those 2 seconds I saw everything I needed to see. He was not worried about my comfort. He was worried about his room. After the toast, Renata came to stand beside him. Together, they looked like a company photograph. Polished, coordinated, expensive. She whispered something in his ear and his jaw tightened slightly. Then Colin straightened and said, quietly but not quietly enough, "Mom, maybe find a seat at the bar. Give us space to work the room. Give us space." I picked up my purse. I was walking toward the elevator when Eugenia Holbrook touched my arm. She had followed me from the table without my noticing. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were direct. "You don't have to leave," she said. "It's all right," I smiled. "I'm just stepping out for some air." She studied me for a moment. Then she said carefully, "I've known Colin for 2 years. He's a talented young man." She paused. "But I've also noticed, over 2 years, that he never mentions his mother." My throat tightened, she continued. "Not in the way successful people usually don't mention family because they're modest. In the other way." I understood. She didn't need to say more. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Eugenia Holbrook remained where she was, watching me with an expression that was neither pity nor judgment. Before the doors closed, she said quietly, "I hope whatever happens next, you're treated the way you deserve." The elevator took me down 32 floors to the lobby. I found a chair near the window and waited. 43 minutes later, a man in a dark overcoat stepped through the revolving doors. Raymond Okafor was 68, silver-haired, with the unhurried posture of someone who had spent decades solving problems that other people hadn't realized were problems yet. He carried a leather briefcase that I recognized from years ago, the same one he'd had when Thomas and I first walked into his office. Some things don't change. He sat down beside me, placed the briefcase on his knees, and looked at my jacket. "The champagne," I said. He nodded once, pressed his lips together, and opened the briefcase. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said. "I know." He pulled out a folder. Inside were documents I had last reviewed 14 months ago, when Raymond advised me to update several account designations after my attorney restructured the family trust. Before I explain what was in that folder, let me tell you something about Thomas. My husband Thomas was a quiet man who noticed everything. He drove a delivery truck for 17 years, and during those 17 years, he developed friendships all across Southeast Texas with the kinds of people that other people overlooked. Warehouse managers, small business owners, a woman named Clara Voss, who ran a modest commercial cleaning supply company out of a garage in Orange County, and who, in 1991, needed a small investment partner to expand her distribution operation. Thomas believed in Clara. He gave her $22,000 from the money we had saved over 6 years. most of it in an account his mother had started for him when he was born. I thought he had lost his mind. We had a 4-year-old son and a roof that needed work. Clara Voss's company grew, slowly at first, then not slowly at all. By 2003, Voss Industrial Supply had regional contracts with school districts, hospital networks, and commercial construction companies across 4 states. Thomas never worked for Clara. He never told anyone he was an investor. He simply held his position and reinvested the returns quietly. Year after year, through accounts, Raymond managed on his behalf. When Thomas died, everything transferred to me. When Colin turned 30 and started Marsh Capital, he asked me if I had any savings I could contribute to his initial operating fund. I told him I had a little, and gave him $75,000 through a secondary account Raymond set up, so that it appeared as a business loan from a small private lending entity called LM Consulting Group. Colin paid it back within 3 years and never knew where it originally came from. He still didn't know. Voss Industrial Supply had, by that point, been acquired twice and folded into a regional conglomerate. But the original equity stake Thomas held, grown and reinvested across 3 decades, had become something Thomas and I could not have imagined sitting at our kitchen table in 1991. Raymond managed it, my attorney protected it, and I lived in my 2-bedroom house in Beaumont and cleaned my garden, and answered the phone when my son called. Not because I had to, because I had learned what Thomas always believed, that money is a tool, not an identity. And because some part of me also believed, hoped, that my son would remain himself regardless of what he accumulated. I had been wrong about that for a while now. Raymond set the documents in front of me on the chair between us. "If you move forward tonight," he said carefully, "I need you to understand what that means for the Marsh Capital funding structure." "I do understand." He studied me. "Loretta, you're certain?" I thought of Colin's face as I walked toward the elevator, not angry, not even guilty, just relieved. "I'm certain," I said. He nodded and picked up his phone. What happened next happened quickly and quietly, which is how things tend to happen when Raymond Okafor is involved. He made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to Eugenia Holbrook, whom, it turned out, Raymond had known professionally for 11 years. I had not arranged that. Some things arrange themselves. 15 minutes later, the elevator opened on the lobby level, and Eugenia Holbrook stepped out. She walked toward us directly, her heels quiet on the marble floor, and sat across from us in a low lobby chair, with the focused calm of someone who had received Raymond's summary and processed it in the time it took the elevator to descend. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then she said quietly, "Miss Loretta, is this something you want, or something you feel forced into?" "I want it," I said. "The difference matters." She nodded slowly. What came next, I only know in pieces because I was not in the room for all of it. Raymond has told me some, Eugenia told me some. What I know is this. Eugenia Holbrook returned to the 32nd floor. She pulled 3 other investors aside before the evening concluded. She shared what Raymond had shared with her. Carefully, professionally, without drama. About LM Consulting Group, about Voss Industrial Supply, about the full picture of what Loretta Marsh actually represented financially. She did not do this to embarrass Colin. She did it because she was about to commit significant capital to a man whose credibility and disclosure she needed to trust completely. When Colin found out I was in the lobby, that I hadn't simply left, that Raymond was with me, that Eugenia had spoken to him, he came down in the elevator himself. He stepped out into the lobby wearing the expression of a man who has just realized the floor beneath him is different from the floor he thought he was standing on. He saw Raymond first, then me. "What is this?" he said. His voice was controlled but strained. Raymond stood without hurrying. "Good evening, Colin." Colin looked at me. "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at my son for a long moment. "What I did," I said, "was get champagne poured on my jacket at the most important night of your career while your wife suggested I was bad for appearances." His jaw tightened. "You had no right to," he stopped himself. His eyes moved to Raymond's briefcase, to the documents half visible inside. His expression shifted. "I want to tell you what I saw in that moment, because it matters more than what was said next." I saw my son do the calculation. Quickly, the way businessmen do. He assessed what he knew, what he didn't know, what it meant. and I watched the assessment land. What didn't know was that his mother had quietly been holding a financial position that touched, indirectly, through original equity and reinvested capital, several of the same commercial real estate distribution channels that Marsh Capital had been building into this fund. Raymond told him, simply and clearly. Colin sat down. Not in a dramatic way. He just sat down on the edge of a lobby chair as if his legs had registered the information before his mind had fully processed it. You funded LM Consulting, he said. Yes, that was my initial capital. Part of it, Raymond said. Yes. The silence that followed was one of the longest I have sat through. Finally, Renata appeared at the elevator doors. She had come down after him. She took one look at Raymond's briefcase, at Colin's face, at me sitting across from my son in the lobby of her husband's launch event, and she went very still. What's happening? She asked carefully. Colin didn't answer immediately. It was Eugenia Holbrook who spoke, stepping forward from behind Raymond. She looked at Renata directly and said, Your mother-in-law is going to need a better seat than the hotel bar next time. The words were quiet. They landed like stones. Renata looked at me. Something crossed her face that I had not seen from her before. Not embarrassment, but the specific fear of a person who realizes they have misjudged which direction the ground slopes. Colin finally looked up at me. His face was drawn. Why didn't you tell me? I held his gaze. Tell you what, exactly? That you, he stopped. That any of this existed. I looked at my son carefully. When you were 26 and starting out, I gave you what you needed without strings attached, I told him. Because your father and I believed you deserved to build something real, not something handed to you. His expression shifted. But I also watched you, Colin, over the years. I watched what success asked of you and what you gave it. He looked away. And tonight, I added softly, I understood that what it had asked for was me. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Bay's voice came from the elevator. She had apparently followed her father down without anyone noticing, the way children do when they sense that something important is happening, that the adults would prefer they missed. Dad, she said, standing in the open elevator doors with her dress shoes and her serious eyes. Colin looked at her. Bea, go back upstairs. She didn't move. Did you really ask Grammy to sit at the bar? His throat moved. She stepped out of the elevator. She walked past Renata without looking at her and stood beside me. She took my hand. No 11-year-old should have to do that. The fact that she did said more about what the adults in that room had failed at than any legal document Raymond carried. Colin watched his daughter take my hand, and I saw something finally break through the surface of his face. Not the professional mask. Not the calculated response. Something older. Younger. Something from before he learned that embarrassment was a social currency to be spent carefully. He stood from the chair. Raymond, he said quietly. What do I need to do? Raymond looked at him for a moment, then glanced at me. I gave a small nod. That depends, Raymond said, on what you want the next 10 years to look like. The Aldridge Tower closed at midnight. By 11, the last investors had said their goodbyes, and the Marsh Capital launch event was officially over. Raymond took his briefcase and left me with the understanding that certain conversations would continue in the morning. Eugenia Holbrook pressed my hand before she left and said, I'll be in touch. Just those 3 words. They meant quite a lot. Renata took Bea upstairs to gather their things from the hospitality suite Colin had reserved. Colin and I sat in the lobby alone. He looked the way people look after they have held a posture too long, relieved to release it, and unsure what shape they are underneath. I don't know where to begin, he said. Then don't begin anywhere, I told him. Just sit here a moment. He did. After a while he said, Did you know this would happen tonight? No, I came because you invited me, because I thought my son wanted me there. He lowered his face. The shame in his posture was different from embarrassment. It was slower, heavier. Renata told me, I said, that I was bad for appearances. He closed his eyes briefly. She shouldn't have, Colin. I waited until he looked at me. She said what she believed. The question is whether you believe it too. The longest pause of the evening, then quietly, I don't. I just stopped correcting her. That's not different enough, I said. He nodded. He knew. I thought of Thomas then. Of the specific way Thomas used to handle hard truths, without theater, without softening them past the point of usefulness. He would have said something like, The problem isn't what you've done. The problem is that you're waiting to feel bad enough to change, and that's not how it works. You decide to change, and then you feel bad about the right things. I didn't say that to Colin, but I thought it. Instead, I said, I'm not here to take anything from you. You need to know that. He looked up. I'm here because I'm your mother. And because the people in that room tonight, the real ones, the ones with good judgment, they didn't need you to have a perfect background. They needed you to be honest about the one you have. He was quiet for a long time. Then, what happens with Raymond and the fund? I told him the truth. Some conversations would happen. Some disclosures needed to be made. Eugenia Holbrook had questions that deserved real answers. That wasn't punishment. It was accounting for the gap between the story he'd been telling and the full picture. None of that has to destroy what you built, I said. But it does require you to stop pretending you built it alone. He looked at me for a long time. Then slowly, he nodded. The lobby was quiet around us. A cleaning crew worked at the far end of the room, the sound of a cart moving across marble floors. Familiar to me, that sound. The sound of honest work done late in the evening, by people nobody thanks enough. Colin noticed me listening to it. He didn't say anything, but something crossed his face. A recognition. Maybe the beginning of one. 3 weeks passed before I saw him again. He came to Beaumont on a Saturday morning, no notice, just a knock on my front door at 9:30. He was wearing jeans and a plain shirt. No watch. He looked like he'd slept poorly and was trying not to make it anyone else's problem. I let him in and made coffee. He sat at my kitchen table the way he used to at 12, slightly too large for the chair, elbows on the table, reading the cereal box without realizing he was doing it. He said, Raymond told me about Voss. I know. He said I had no idea. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Mom, I'm sorry about the bar. The hotel bar. The send her to the bar so she's out of sight. I nodded. I'm sorry about all of it, he said. His voice was not polished. It was just his voice, that matters. I put a cup in front of him. He looked at it, then at me. You look like Dad in this kitchen, he said. Thomas used to sit exactly where you're sitting, I told him, reading things absent-mindedly. He smiled, just slightly. Then it faded. I've been thinking about Bea. What about her? She took your hand, he said it quietly. In the lobby, in front of everyone. Yes, she did. He closed his eyes briefly. I don't want her to grow up thinking that's something she has to do. I let that sit between us. Then I said, then give her a father she doesn't have to protect people from. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded. Renata and I are in counseling, he said. She's trying. I think we both have things to figure out about what we've been telling ourselves. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. He reached into his jacket pocket then and put something on the table. A photograph. Old, slightly soft at the edges. Thomas and me at the Beaumont Botanical Garden, 1994. Colin was 7 in the picture, standing between us, holding both our hands, all 3 of us laughing at something that had already been forgotten, except in the shape of our faces. I found this in the office, he said quietly. I keep it on my desk. I wanted you to know I kept it. I picked up the photograph. You know what I remember about that day? I told him. He shook his head. You had ice cream on your shirt from lunch and you were convinced we couldn't take the photo because you were a mess. Your father said the best photos were always the ones where somebody had ice cream on their shirt. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. I miss him, he said. I know, sweetheart, then quietly. I miss you too. Even when I was the one creating the distance, that sentence cost him something. I could tell by how still he went after saying it. Some truths do that. They require more from the person speaking them than from the person receiving them. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. We didn't talk for a while after that. We just sat in Thomas's kitchen with our coffee and let the morning do what mornings do. 6 months after the Aldridge Tower, I drove to Houston for Bee's school play. She was the narrator. She wore a cardboard crown and took the whole thing entirely seriously, which made me love her even more. Colin sat beside me in the school auditorium. Not in a corporate lobby, not at a dinner designed for impressions. In a middle school auditorium with sticky armrests, and fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly on the left side of the room. Renata sat on the other side of him. Things between them were still being rebuilt. Carefully, honestly, which is the only way things worth rebuilding get rebuilt. She leaned across Colin halfway through the first act and said, quietly, to me. She told her teacher her grandmother was her hero. I looked forward at the stage where my granddaughter was standing very straight and speaking very clearly into a microphone she held with both hands. My throat got tight. After the play, Bia ran to me first. Not first among the adults, first out of anyone. She wrapped both arms around my waist and said into my jacket, "Grammy, I dedicated it to you." I held her and looked over her head at my son. Colin was watching us. He didn't have the expression of a man managing appearances, or monitoring a room, or calculating the distance between his present and his past. He had the expression of a man who was simply standing in his own life and finally allowing himself to see it clearly. He nodded at me, once. Slowly. I nodded back. Outside, the Houston evening smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and the particular sweetness of late spring in Texas. Bia walked between Colin and me on the way to the parking lot, holding both our hands, swinging our arms slightly, narrating the play to us from beginning to end, as if we hadn't just watched it. She is, without question, the best of all of us. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to like and subscribe. Quiet stories like this one remind us that the most important things we pass on to our children aren't the ones we can count or display. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think forgiveness is possible after public humiliation? Could you have walked back into that relationship? Or would you have let it go? And tell me where you're watching from tonight.